The silence wasn't peaceful. It was deafening. The kind of silence that confirms no one can hear you scream. The pain in her left leg was a white-hot poker, a sick, relentless throb. But the cold was far worse. It wasn't just a shiver. It was a slow, insidious paralysis, starting in her fingers, crawling up her arms, threatening to switch off her mind. Piece by agonizing piece. She wasn't a record-breaking climber, not a professional adventurer. She was an urban planner. She spent her weekdays designing spaces of glass and concrete, places meant to bring people together, all with rigid, calculated efficiency. The promise of the struggle was right there, in the air she breathed. The desperate fight at 13,000 feet to decide if she would fight, or let the white swallow her whole. Her name was Elisa Marques, 35 years old. Elisa's eyes were wide, fixed on a useless, frayed piece of rope swaying just out of reach. She had just fallen, but she knew the brutal clock that started ticking the moment she hit the rock. She had minutes. Minutes before shock took hold, minutes before the woman, the mountain survivor, turned into a meaningless, frozen statistic. She was face down on the narrow, unforgiving ledge, the mountain having violently rejected her body moments before. The snow felt like coarse, unstable sand beneath her cheek. The wind, mercifully, had died down, and that was the terrifying sign. The stillness, the quiet, the calm before the final deep freeze. The white void was patiently waiting. This was to be her 5th major traverse. Days before, she'd texted a photo of her perfectly packed backpack to her sister, laughing at her own obsession with control. The image of that last hot cup of coffee. The promise to be back before Christmas. That was the chilling contrast. The mountain, for her, was the one place where true life and death chaos had logical rules. It was where the normality of her structured life was finally stripped away, leaving only the essential. But to balance the exactness of city life, she needed the brutal honesty of the mountain. Elisa was meticulous, almost obsessive. Every trip was planned with the absolute precision of an architectural blueprint. Escape routes, emergency caches, meteorology studied for months in advance. Her name was Elisa Marques, 35 years old. She wasn't a record-breaking climber, not a professional adventurer. She was an urban planner. She spent her weekdays designing spaces of glass and concrete, places meant to bring people together, all with rigid, calculated efficiency. The woman of rigid plans, now utterly and completely at the mercy of the random. It could be you, a cautious, dedicated person, just looking for peace on the summit. But the summit doesn't offer peace. It only offers the struggle. She was about to learn that to become a mountain survivor, you first had to be utterly broken. Then, the overwhelming loneliness. Her body tumbled in a freezing, sickening mix of snow and sharp scree. The smell of ozone, fear, and a sharp, metallic hint of blood. She stopped, wedged abruptly and painfully into a jagged rock crevice. It was the whisper that the ground, the very thing she trusted, was no longer stable. The mountain had violently withdrawn its consent. Elisa felt the snow give way, slow, agonizingly slow motion. The world violently inverted. The sound of her own expensive gear tearing loose metal against unforgiving rock was the last organized noise in the universe. The guide shouted a warning, "Ice layer." But the fatal sound didn't come from above. It came from below. A sickening, muted humph, the sound of 1,000,000 tons of snow suddenly deciding to move in unison. It wasn't the roar of an epic avalanche. The tragedy came, disguised as silent and brilliant, deceptive sunshine. It was 2:30 in the afternoon. The small group was just a few hundred feet from the technical summit. The sun glaring off the white void was blinding. Elisa felt the thin air burn her throat, a familiar, almost perverse sensation of peak exertion. The air was ice pure. The temperature instantly dropped, instantly became agony. But the worst feeling was the absence. No voices, no rescue beacon, no movement. Human presence had utterly evaporated. All that remained was the ice, the paralyzing pain, and her raw human vulnerability. A small, injured body at the mercy of the eternal Cordillera. Finally, she rolled out, collapsing onto a small, precarious ledge. She was out of the hole. A partial solution. But the sheer exertion cost her the last surge of adrenaline. The pain was now constant. A brutal, throbbing drummer in her leg. And she was absolutely terrifyingly alone in the white void. She pulled out the tiny stove and checked the fuel gauge. Almost gone. She had to ration the fire. A brief, precious touch of flame to melt a handful of snow. Gulp the lukewarm, metallic water, and then kill the flame instantly, terrified of wasting the resource. Every single inch of movement was a silent, internal scream. She dragged herself forward, using her left arm and elbow as a raw lever, feeling the sickening friction of her clothing shredding against the rock. Water. She needed water desperately. She used the last drops of her dwindling energy to scratch out a shallow snow shelter, a crude, pathetic cave that offered minimum protection. Elisa had to get out of the crevice, that cold, dark hole that offered temporary shelter from the wind, but was also her undeniable death capsule. The initial fear gave way to a primal rage. She used the spike of her ice axe, not to climb, but to anchor her weight. The fog rose fast, a dense, ghost-like blanket. In minutes, visibility dropped to zero. The mountain, which was cruel, was now impossibly blind. Elisa was utterly disoriented. And it wasn't just the cold. Dehydration at this altitude was a silent killer. Her mouth was bone dry. Her tongue felt like rough paper, swelling in her throat. The mountain had swallowed her, and she knew that for the woman who would become the mountain survivor, the true, desperate fight was just beginning. And then came the worst. The first enemy wasn't the cold. It was immobility. She had beaten the trap of immobility, but the mountain rewarded her with a new, immediate enemy. A thick, blinding fog that rushed up from the valley and instantly erased the world. The darkness of the fog and the deepening darkness of her solitude began to play tricks on her mind. She heard voices, distant laughter that wasn't there. Hunger was a gnawing, aching pit, but the thirst was far more urgent, far more immediate. The water solution was a fleeting reprieve, a momentary pause in the inevitable slide. But the most insidious enemy was the sleep. Not the natural rest she desperately needed, but the sweet, treacherous surrender of deep hypothermia. Just close your eyes, Eliza. The cold will stop hurting. It's okay now. Her headlamp, her last source of external light, gasped its last. The battery was spent. It flickered once. Then it died completely. Elisa felt her brain slow to a crawl. Her hands trembled violently for a moment, but then became utterly still. Her breath came out shallow, almost non-existent. Her vision, blurred before, now darkened from within. She tried to move, to stamp her feet in a futile effort to generate heat. But the broken ankle screamed its protest. Her breathing became shallow, insufficient. Her body, with a fatal, chilling intelligence, began to divert blood away from her extremities. Her fingers and toes quickly turned into numb, icy, useless lumps. The moment of near death arrived in the deepest, most frigid hours of the second night. She had burned the very last match. The very last speck of stove fuel was gone. She lay curled up, the sleeping bag no longer providing any insulation. The cold was total. There was no more sharp pain. only a profound insensitivity that was the chilling anteroom to death. The night descended again, a deeper, colder blackness, and the wind returned, violent, cutting through her like a knife. Her layers of expensive clothing felt like paper. The mountain survivor's body was in full, dangerous thermoregulatory collapse. She was losing the battle against exhaustion. Supplies were gone. Her body was pleading for ultimate surrender. The climax was approaching, but nothing, absolutely nothing, could prepare her for what was truly coming. There was no panic left, only hollow acceptance. The surrender felt complete. The mountain survivor was about to fail. Her body had stopped fighting. What pulled her back from the very edge wasn't a heroic fantasy. It was a small, hard piece of red plastic that pressed insistently against her frozen ribcage. The human detail that unexpectedly saved her life. She had enough water to last perhaps one more morning. But the cold doesn't wait. And in the increasing darkness, the mountain deployed its latest, most effective weapon. The treachery of the body itself. She fought the torpor, the overwhelming desire to simply stop. She fought back by reciting her home address, her sister's phone number, her grandmother's name. Small, desperate human rituals to prove to her dying mind that she was still there, still conscious, still fighting the white void. She suddenly remembered that last cup of coffee, the casual note on the fridge. All of it seemed impossibly distant, a life lived by someone else, on another planet. The world seemed to be switching her off forever. It was a gentle, terrifying slide, a silent invitation to join the mountain, to become another forgotten piece of snow and rock. She didn't see the rescue helicopter. She was too blind, too exhausted, too numb. But 10 miles away, the search team saw it. A small, persistent flash against the overwhelming, indifferent backdrop of the white void. It wasn't movie heroism. It was a cheap, simple piece of emergency kit, and the simple, undeniable human resistance that clings fiercely to the improbable. On the 4th attempt, the minuscule, beautiful flame sputtered to life. It wasn't about the fire. It was about the focus that flame provided. The flame lasted less than a minute, but it was enough to bring back the memory of her signal mirror. The piece of gear she had considered leaving behind, thinking it was useless weight. With a determination that came from the deepest, most desperate recess of her soul, she used her frozen fingernails to scrape off a small piece of resin from her plastic zipper pull. She tried, 3 agonizing times, to spark the useless lighter. A cheap plastic lighter, forgotten in an inner jacket pocket that she had grabbed on a childish impulse at the last convenience store. There was still a tiny bit of lighter fluid inside. Not enough fuel to warm her body, but enough to re-engage her mind. The sun was just beginning to rise, a pale threat of light. Elisa dragged her body out of the shelter, located the mirror, and in one final, monumental act of will, aimed it toward the east, toward the faint point where the light was trying to pierce the lingering fog. She returned to the city, to her architecture, to normality. But the woman who came back was fundamentally changed. She was stronger, yes, but also fundamentally broken in a way that rebuilt her. She had seen the absolute limit. She had kissed the white void and miraculously returned. The sound of wind was a panic trigger. The cold feel of a glass of water made her entire body shudder uncontrollably. She needed time, years even, to understand that the fight had actually ended. And if you know someone who is facing their own personal mountain, their own isolating battle against the white void, please share this video. Someone out there might need to feel this strength today. Alive, she suffered severe frostbite on the tips of her toes and fingers. Her ankle required multiple surgeries and many months of painful physical therapy. But the true price was psychological. For months, Silence was no longer peace. It was a terrifying enemy. Comment alive below. Drop your flag and let us know that you, too, would be ready for this fight. Life had pulled her back. The rescue itself was brutal, clinical. The flight in the helicopter. The white-hot, agonizing pain that returned as her body began to warm up. Elisa had survived the mountain, but the mountain did not let her go whole. Elisa came back home, but she left a piece of her soul in the cruel coldness of that mountain, and she would never, ever be the same. If you believe that the struggle of this mountain survivor shows us the immense, indomitable power of the human spirit, and that these survival stories unite us and remind us all of our own inner strength,